I'd like to call this council and committee meeting to order. We begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas, and the Anishinaabe people. Madam Clerk, the roll call, please.
All members of council are present, Your Worship.
Thank you. There are no announcements or addendums this evening. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Luberts? Oh, Councillor Duvenel.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I have a few of them. To declare a conflict on PDS 32, 2019, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, Block 70 Peace Bridge Village, Northside Louisa Street, Ashton Homes Western Limited. As I live in a subdivision developed by Ashton Homes Western Limited that has not yet been transferred to the municipality, I have to declare the same conflict on PDS 33-2019, Peace Bridge Village Phase 1, amending subdivision agreement, south side of Regional Road 3, east side of Arthur Street, and I have to declare a conflict on CAO-09-2019, funding request for modernization and upgrade to the Fort Erie Group family practice, as the company I work for has been retained to provide services related to the proposed renovations at the Fort Erie Group family practice.
And I presume then that you're also declaring a conflict with respect to the public meeting D, which relates to Ashton Homes? Oh, sorry, you don't live there, but it is Ashton Homes. Okay. Yep, that's this evening.
Yes, I will be declaring a conflict on that as well.
PO 13. And you'll be providing the yellow sheets to the clerk. Thank you very much. Are there any other disclosures of pecuniary interest? If not, then there are no notices of upcoming public meetings because we're holding them all tonight. So we have 4 public meetings, the first of which is under the Municipal Drain Act. And so we will hear from staff, David Maiden, perhaps the representative on behalf of the engineer, Neil Morris, and then members of the public, if they wish to address council with respect to the report, will be given an opportunity to do so. So why don't we start with, Dave, are you going to start, or did you want the engineer to start? Okay, perfect. Good evening.
Fences, lands, crops for the disposal of soil. This construction will have a minimal impact. However, allowances will be paid to the landowners. Assessment of costs. Again, I just want to briefly touch this. I know I had stated that assessments will be discussed at the quarter revision. The assessment schedule is based on the established cost estimated for works. Assessments are based on the benefits derived from the drainage works. These are categorized as benefit section 22 and outlet section 23. There are potential grants that can be acquired. One is the agricultural drainage infrastructure policy, which is in effect for myself, and farm property class tax rate. There is a website there for anybody that would like to get further information in regards to grants that are available. Again, briefly on assessment of costs. The benefit assessment is for lands which are increased in value and made easier to be maintained as a result of the drainage works. Benefit is assessed to lands which directly abut the drain. The outlet assessment, on the other hand, is for all lands inside the watershed boundary that use the drain. The assessments are calculated on the length of the drain and the volume of the rate of flow. Future maintenance works have been considered as an assessment in the assessment schedule, and the benefit and outlet liability assessments are allocated for future maintenance costs as well in the engineer's report. Where do we go from here? Council considers the report, and if the report is to proceed, council sets the sitting for the quarter revision. This can be done at the time of provisionary bylaw, and which we will hear appeals in regards to assessment. There is another situation involved if people are not happy with the quarter revisions decision. They can take their request to the tribunal and or the referee. Once all appeals have been exhausted, the engineer's report can be amended if required, and the work can proceed 10 days after the third reading of the bylaw. And thank you. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Neil Morris from K. Smarts and Associate. He is the engineer in regards to this project.
Thank you, Dave.
Good evening.
Oh, don't worry. Yeah.
Good.
Your Worship, Councillors, I'm pleased to present this my Glenny Drain report. This report, we were originally appointed, as Dave said it, back in 2005. This is a Section 78 report, so it is for an existing municipal drain, and we are updating the assessment schedules, just updating the report. The last report was done in 1942, so it's been a long time that a report has been done on this drain as well. There's been a lot of changes with property owners and parcels, and just updating sort of how we determine assessments, our procedures compared to in the 1940s. And like Dave said, the last maintenance was done in 1986. So it definitely does need some work on it. The total length of the north branch, so the drain is divided into two different sections at this point. When the 1942 report was done, the QEW was put in place, and it broke up what was the original Glenny drain. And some of the purpose of this report is to clarify that division that was made at that point as well, because it wasn't very clear in the original report. So what we've done is we've broken it up into two definite assessment schedules, so it's a lot easier for the drain superintendent to maintain it and to do work on it in the future. As well, there's provisions to deal with some of the new environmental restrictions that would be in place that weren't in place in the 1940s. So the total length of the drain is about 5.25 kilometers long. The north branch is about 2 kilometers, and the south branch is about 3 kilometers long. The watershed of the north branch is about 130 hectares, and the south one is almost 300 hectares in size. So it's a moderate size watershed drain for this municipality. There are larger ones in the municipality, but this is still a fairly significant drain. The total cost of the project at this, my estimate, is approximately $400,000. Of that, about $200,000 of that is for construction, and the remainder is for allowances that are paid out to landowners, as well as engineering and general administration costs. Of the total assessment at this point, about $87,000 would be directly assessed to the municipality at the end of the day. There's another $87,000 which is assessed to MTO. They own the QEW. They're basically the other largest assessed land in this watershed. The total assessment to all the other landowners is about $230,000, and in this project we are not putting in any new culverts for road crossings or railway crossings, so there are no special assessments to utilities at this point. So this is what the watershed is at this point. It's sort of outlined in green at this point. The blue lines are areas where we're not planning to do any work at this point. And the red lines are parts of the drain that we are proposing to clean out at this point. So this would be a ditch clean out in those areas. In some places it will be quite a bit. I know up by the QEW right now on the south branch, that area is inundated all year round, and the farmland around that area too is very wet and saturated as well. The field, I think, has water on it today, if I recall correctly, when I was out there last. So this is something that is a clean out it would help the lands in this area at this point. As Dave said, the objectives for this meeting are to give the public and council an opportunity to ask questions about the design aspect to the engineer, as well for council to sort of decide what action they want to do, if you want to give first and second reading to the bylaw, to refer it back to the engineer, or to sort of stop the project and pay for all the engineer's costs and any other liabilities on the drain at this point as well. A couple other things. So any decision that council makes at this point, or that I make as an engineer, can always be appealed to another third a body above us, which was the tribunal and the referee that Dave had said earlier. And the purpose of this meeting is not to go into assessments. I'm perfectly willing after, if landowners want to do that, to discuss it, but those are usually dealt with at the Court of Revision, which will be held usually 20 to 30 days after this meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. Any members of council have any questions? Councillor Noyes and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mayor. To the presenter, thank you for your presentation. In this drain, I understand there's maintenance go-forward costs are included in the amount.
So those maintenance numbers are proposed maintenance amounts. So as a municipal drain, I've sort of determined what proportions when people, for maintenance work that has to be done in the future, I've determined proportions that landowners would be assessed in the future. So those amounts in the report aren't what they will be paying. Those percentages would be what a landowner would be looking at. So if there was $1,000 clean out, they'd be looking at that percentage. That percentage is what they would have to be paying of that $1,000. So if it was a 6% assessment and it was $1,000, that landowner would be looking at a $60 assessment.
Thank you for that. I have some more questions. Who is responsible for the maintenance of the drains?
So legally, the municipality is obligated to maintain the drains as per my report. But that being said, again, the costs that the municipality incurs would be distributed to the watershed as per my report, as per those percentages.
Further question. In your report, you've talked about the culverts in regards to them on people's lands, not the Taliford area or the Ministry of Transportation, any of those. And you in the report it says that the maintenance and replacement of the cost of the culverts is not included in this report, but that it's the responsibility of the homeowners. Now, so if the homeowner, and I don't quite know what that means, if the culverts don't exist right now, so am I to then assume that in parts of this ditch or the stream, the drain, whatever we want to call it, that it has been occluded by, like somebody putting dirt in it or something?
So what typically happens with culverts, and this is in my report as well, so what I've done at this point is if a landlord doesn't have any culverts across the ditch right now at this point, what they're suggested to do at this point is to talk to the drainage superintendent. In my report, I will have recommended culvert sizes, and the drainage superintendent will go in and put in that appropriate size that's required there. If they go through that process and they just have one culvert on their property at that point, typically 50% of that culvert would be assessed to the upstream watershed, and that landowner would only have to pay for 50% of the cost to put in that culvert. If they have a second one put in on their property, or if they put it on their own, they're risking sort of that sort of subsidy, I guess I would call it. So,
If I can continue,
Yes.
What happens if the person decides not to put the culvert in?
that
Is that an option for them?
yeah. So if they don't put it in, then it's just it's a recommended size at this point, and it's more if someone wants to put it in the future, it's there, so the drainage superintendent knows what the proper size is. Because in many cases we have drains where a lot of landowners may Friday afternoon put a very small culvert in and cause backups to upstream landowners. And the purpose of this report is to encourage landowners to go through a process to contact the drainage superintendent to do the correct thing.
I have a further question. If the property owner sees where the drain is going through their property and decides to do the manual labor themselves and gets that part of the drain cleared out to let's say, to the inspector's satisfaction. Is that homeowner then, or that property owner, given a credit for that work? Because then it no longer, it's done, so no one else has to do it.
Yes, they can. It's a little more tricky to do it in this case at this stage. What would have to happen is there would be a type of an invoice that would be sent to the municipality, and we'd wrap it into sort of the cost of the drain report that they would get sort of paid for the work that they did. So it's a little bit tricky, but there are ways that we can do things like that.
A further question, having heard that, although it's tricky, it's not impossible, do the homeowners, the property owners understand that that avenue may be open to them to do some cost savings for themselves?
Well, I know in my specifications, it does say that landowners are allowed to brush and do stuff like that on their own property. I've typically found that doesn't happen very often and not to the standard of which a contractor needs to maintain the drain, but I would have to defer to the drain superintendent at that point. But I have no problem with landowners doing brushing work. I just prefer that they don't dig out the drain because there are grades and stuff and sort of side slopes and things like that I want to ensure that a licensed contractor is doing properly. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Butler. Perfect. Any other councilors? Councilor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. And thank you very much. I just got a couple of things that I just want to get some clarification and a little better understanding. When Mr. Maiden was up here, he mentioned the regular, or the outlet, was it the outlet assessment? And then the benefiting property owners?
Yes.
You said, well, what's the difference when you have a watershed, and then isn't that the benefiting property owners in the watershed?
Well, they're all included. They're all included, through your worship to the councilor. They're all included they are all assessed as a benefit. Everybody inside the watershed boundary is assessed at a benefit. That is directly, let me reiterate that. The benefit is for the abutting landowners because the drain is directly on their property. So they get immediate results from that.
Yeah.
Okay, now the other allowance, everybody inside the watershed boundary, including the person who is charged with the benefit, also gets charged that. So everybody inside the watershed gets charged that one, and the only people that get charged the benefit assessment are the ones that directly abut the drain.
Okay, all right. I hope everybody has a little better understanding of that. Because it is confusing. Who's the benefiting owner? Who's the outlet? Who's getting charged what?
Yeah, through your worship. So what the outlet assessment is doing is it is an amount that with British common law and surface water rights, upstream landowners don't necessarily have the right to drain onto downstream landowners' property. So what the outlet assessment is doing, it is allowing these upstream landowners water to flow through someone else's property. So what it is it's basically an area, a factored area to account for the water that comes off their property and goes through another landowner's property. So it isn't a benefit to them. It is basically the cost to have your water go through someone else's property and potentially damage them, and relieve yourself of that potential liability. That's what that assessment is for.
Okay, now, I just want to get in with the maintenance. And you mentioned that the last time there was any maintenance was in
1986.
Yeah. And is there anything in the act that says a municipality is responsible to maintain it, I'd say, on a regular basis, every 10 years or any, well, 20 years or?
Through your worship to the counselor, there's no direct timeline in the drainage superintendent usually goes by public input. If a resident deems that there's a problem with the drain, then they should notify the drainage superintendent. The drainage superintendent should take it upon himself to investigate and decide whether maintenance needs to be done and address it at that time.
All right. Now, the reason I asked that question is when I look at the drains, if we waited till since 1986 to do any work, I mean, we all know ourselves with maintenance on our house and maintenance on our car. If we wait forever, it costs more. If we do it on a regular basis, it costs less. So now these property owners are paying for, basically paying for a drain that's been neglected since 1986. I would wonder, is there any way that they can be compensated for that? Is there any grant funding? Like you've mentioned some other places where they can get some relief.
Through your worship to the counselor, I'm not aware of any grant money for lack of maintenance by the municipality. I will say that the town of Fort Erie is presently trying to incorporate a 10-year maintenance plan on all the drains. This being a drain that the engineer's report was last done in 1942. As Neil had indicated, there's all kinds of changes in regards to properties, property sizes, watershed boundary changes and that kind of thing. So that kind of indicates that we needed a new engineer's report. But in regards to any financial gain by lack of maintenance through the Drainage Act, I do not believe there's any.
Is there any other municipalities that have a regular maintenance that we might be able to? I would think that it would be a good idea for us to adopt something in the town of Fort Erie that we do a regular maintenance policy.
Yes, through your worship, there are a number of municipalities that do have regular maintenance. Norfolk would be an example of one. Another one would be Niagara-on-the-Lake, but like I said, their land there is much more valuable than the land here. So there are a number of municipalities that do have Chatham-Kent would be another example of one, which is a very large municipality. But there are many that are in the same boat you are. Your municipality is that do it when requests come in.
Okay, all right, thanks. And there was one slide there that it showed the numbers, the total cost of the project, and then there was some maintenance or construction costs.
Yes.
I'm a little confused. Why do we have to construct? I think, isn't the drain already there? What is the construction for?
So the construction is the clean out and the new work, that type of work, the brushing and that to bring it up to a modern standard, basically. So it's is a heavy duty maintenance work that has to be done on the drain, and that's what the construction costs are. So it's it would be the cost for the excavator and contractor to come out there and physically do the work that's needed to bring it up to a modern standard.
Well, what was the other number for? The number on the top, it said.
That's the total
Of
cost.
the project.
Yes. So with these projects, it is the cost is the total cost for the project. So that's engineering, that's allowances, that's administration time for the municipal staff, as well as construction costs. So we include the total project cost with it, not just the primary construction costs. And
So that slide that we were looking at, then that top number was the total cost, and then
yes,
construction, and then the assessment for CNR, the assessment to the town.
Yeah.
The assessment, that would, all those would add up to the top number, is that what I'm?
yes, yeah.
All right, okay. And one last question. The blue lines that you had on one of your last photos that you said
Do you mind if I bring
we're
it up
not
again?
doing any work on, why would those areas be excluded? Are they in good shape? Yeah, the blue areas.
Yeah. In some cases, some of the landowners have done work on those sections, and in other cases, they're in pretty good shape. So that's, in some of the areas, it's fairly urbanized, a little more urban, so the landowners have cut the grass along it. And other areas, they've cleaned out the ditch and stuff like that on a routine basis, so, yes.
All right, okay, thanks. That's all.
Thank you very much. Any other counselors? Mr. Morris, maybe Mr. Maiden can answer this better. How many municipal drains are there in the town of Fort Erie that the town is responsible for?
Oh. Here, but I believe it's roughly
Okay, that wouldn't be too wild. And perhaps you can also answer why it would be 10 years between the meeting in April of 2006 and the meeting that took place in 2016.
I think that question would be better put to our predecessors, myself, predecessor, and Mr. Morris's predecessor. Once we both got on board, we tried to get this engineer's report through.
Okay, this was another one of those deja vu projects that Councillor Noyes and I recognized in 2005. Anyways, it's nice to have it back on the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask if there are any members here members of the public or the audience who wish to ask questions or speak to the council with respect to the Glenny, the Glenny drain. Yes, please come forward, sir. And if we could have your name and address for the record, that would be helpful.
Donnie knows. Paul Graves, 3077 Ridgemount Road. My property doesn't actually touch this ditch, so I don't know how is this going to affect me. And what I've got like 12 acres out there. What is the cost going to be to me?
So there would be in the report an indication of the assessment if you're on that list, and Mr. Morris can perhaps provide that information to you right now if he has it.
Sure. Do you mind if I sort of put that up?
I think the ditch runs behind my place. I can't see up there with these glasses.
Where is your property?
Town line and Ridgemount. There's Ridgemount.
Yep.
College.
Town line.
Yep. Right there in the corner. That's mine.
Let me just,
Corner of Town Line and Ridgemont, you said?
yeah, just give me a second here.
So that's,
Just gonna put this up. So it should be right in here.
are you north on Town Line?
Told you I can't read up there.
Or are you,
Yeah. So this is Ridgemount right
That's
here.
town line. Yeah.
Or sorry. And
That's
Ridgemount.
town line. Where's Ridgemount?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
you're within the watershed?
Yeah, so you're within the watershed at this point, and your assessment would be just an outlet assessment. So again, as I explained to Councillor Don Lubitz, sorry, that you're basically paying for your water to flow through a downstream landowner's property. So that's where it is. There's not a direct benefit to you from this drainage work, but it tangentially may benefit you because by lowering the water table in this area, it just makes it the roads and ditches work a lot better and flow easier at this point. And your assessment,
Now you're gonna go by like property size? Bigger your property, the more you pay, or what?
in this case, yes. So it is based on area of the property. So that's how it's calculated out. And since you are farther downstream, you only pay for parts of the drain that your water drains through. So you don't pay for work way up here because water from your property doesn't drain through it. So it's
Yeah, but
only,
somebody up there is putting their water through me, they should be paying me.
well, in this case, it only occurs where the drain
water's
is.
flowing.
Yeah.
In the event, so you're gonna be interested in knowing what your percentage is and what the assessment is. And that's something that Mr. Maiden can provide to you.
Yep.
If you're not satisfied with those numbers, you have the right to file an appeal with the Court of Revision.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there anyone else who wishes to address council with respect to the Glenny drain? If not, then I'm going to declare. Oh. Good evening.
Good evening, Your
Could we
Worship,
have your
council
name?
members.
Name and-
Dan Carlesso at 2200 Eagle Street. Just an opinion I have and maybe thought for council is I find the number of 234,000 a little extravagant. For 5.2 kilometers, being in the business, that's $45,000 a kilometer. Basically, we're just digging a ditch. I'm sure we could hire some local businesses that could do it for a lot less. Like, I don't know how they're coming up with this number, but it seems pretty steep. And
Yeah, that's an estimate, and that would be put out to tender.
okay. Secondly, I feel the homeowners or landowners shouldn't be responsible for the cleaning of this drain that's been neglected by the town for so many years. I understand if town has to do this drainage system now and get it corrected, I feel the town should be liable, and then later on, if the town wants to implement a maintenance plan, it's understandable. But at the same token, us landowners shouldn't be held accountable now for something that was neglected for so many years. Thank you.
Before you go, any members of council have any questions? Thank you very much, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to address council with respect to this particular issue? Good evening.
Good evening, Gloria Polson, Town Line Road. My question is, there's a section here that says some people are getting a third grant. I don't understand what that third grant is.
Could we have your address on town line?
2567?
Thank you. Mr. Maiden, can you address that?
Good evening.
Hi.
For the farm land class grant, you have to have your property registered with OMAFRA, Ontario Ministry of Food and Rural Affairs, and recognized as a farming property. That way you will receive the 1/3 farm land class grant. And that is directly through OMAFRA.
But in order for me to be classed as farm property, would I not have to show that I have an income from that farm?
Yes, you would. That is all run by OMAFRA. They will have an application form. I can help you obtain that.
Right.
And you would have to apply to OMAFRA to get that classification.
Now, I want to know what this $6,047 that I'm supposedly going to pay is going to do for my property, because right now I'm totally underwater.
So ma'am, perhaps you could address me so that all the councillors can hear what you're
I'm
saying.
sorry.
You asked a question about the assessment,
Yes,
and that's something that I'll let Mr. Maiden respond to, but if you're not happy with that number, you would have to appeal that to the Court of Revision. We'll be establishing a date for that.
definitely, and we will be notified as to the date of that court of revision.
All members within the watershed should be notified.
Right, okay, thank you.
Maiden, did you want to just speak about how those are established?
Mr. Morris would have a better idea on how the assessment values were done. I believe you used the autogenum method. It's a method that is used by drainage engineers at this point in time to do property assessments depending on land use. Whether you have hard surfaces, whether you're agricultural, whether it's a wood lot,
I have 6 acres of wood.
it would have been taken into account. But Mr. Morris could comment better on that for you because he was the one that did the assessment value.
Right, like I'd like to know how they arrived at this $6,047.
Okay, so that's something that I think
Yes, that-
you can deal with Mr. Maiden and Mr. Morris directly on that because they can provide you with greater specifics.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to address council with respect to the Glenny drain this evening? If not, then I'm going to declare this public meeting closed, and we'll be dealing with the engineer's report later this evening. That takes us to our second public meeting, and that is a property rezoning with respect to 63 Belfast Road South. And for these public meetings under the Planning Act, I will ask a staff member to provide council with some background information, and then if the proponent wishes to address council, he or she may do so. And then I'll ask members of the public if there's any in support to address council, any opposed to address council, and any that just have questions may speak to council as well. So we'll start this public meeting. Good evening, Mr. Kernahan.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. An application for a zoning bylaw amendment was submitted by Mike Stepien of Integra Inc., who is the owner of 63 Belfast Road South. The subject property is zoned Core Mixed Use 2 zone. The regulations of the Core Mixed Use 2 zone permit single detached dwellings subject to the regulations of the R2B zone. The regulations for single detached dwellings in the R2B zone permit a maximum height of 1.5 stories and 7.5 meters for single detached dwellings on lots with less than 15 meters of frontage. The purpose of this application is to facilitate the development of the subject property for one 2-story single detached dwelling with a height of 7.7 meters on a lot which has less than 15 meters of frontage. The site-specific zoning is also requested to address an increase in maximum lot coverage and a reduction in the minimum front yard setback to a covered porch and minimum side yard. The application proposes to change the zoning from Core Mixed Use Zone to a site-specific Core Mixed Use 2 zone. Notification of this public meeting was provided in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act by placing a notice in the April 18th, 2019 edition of the Fort Erie Post. In addition, property owners living within 120 meters were mailed notice of the application on April the 25th. This is an aerial photograph of the subject property as well as the surrounding neighborhood. Subject lands are located in the Crystal Beach neighborhood on the west side of Belfast Road South, north of Lincoln Road East. This slide shows the location of the subject property and summarizes the surrounding land uses. To the north are single detached dwellings. To the south is a town-owned parking lot and vacant lands, which are also zoned Core Mixed Use. To the east is Belfast Road South and a multi-unit residential building. To the west are vacant lands zoned Core Mixed Use 2. This slide shows the proposed site plan for the subject property. The plan includes one 2-story single detached dwelling with an attached garage and front and rear porches. This slide shows the proposed front elevation of the 2-story dwelling. This slide demonstrates that there are no natural or cultural heritage features on the property. This slide shows the official plan designation for the subject property, which is Core Mixed Use. Subject property is currently zoned Core Mixed Use 2, which permits single detached dwellings subject to the regulations of the R2B zone. The R2B zone does not permit 2-story dwellings on lots with less than 15 meters of frontage. So although the lot line that touches the street on this subject property is in excess of 15 meters, the actual frontage is less. Frontage of the subject property is measured along a line which is 7.5 meters back from the front lot line, on a line which is perpendicular to a line joining the midpoints of the front and rear lot lines. In this instance, the frontage is considered to be approximately 10 meters. Accordingly, a zoning bylaw amendment is required to permit the construction of a 2-story dwelling on the subject property, and the applicant has also requested a change in zoning to a site-specific Core Mixed Use zone to permit the 2-story dwelling as well as some other site-specific regulations. This is a slide that shows a picture looking west from Belfast Road South, subject property. The slide is looking northwest and shows the dwelling located to the north. This is a view looking northwest from Belfast Road South, just slightly north of where the subject property is located. And this is a collection of some of the other two-story dwellings on Belfast Road South in close proximity to the subject property. That concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions council has.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kernahan. There was a house on this property, but now it's vacant.
That is correct.
Okay. Any members of council have any questions of Mr. Kernahan? If not, your job so far is done on this. I'll ask if Mr. Stepien or anyone on his behalf wishes to address council. It's not mandatory, but that you might wish to speak to council or at least answer any questions that you might have.
Good evening, Worship, councillors. Really nothing more to add. That lays it out clearly what I'm planning to do or hoping to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Any members of council have any questions of Mr. Stepien? It's even shorter than Mr. Kernahan.
It's great.
Let's find out if there's any hidden, you may have a seat now. We'll find out if there's anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the application. Or anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the proposed zoning amendment. There being none, I'm going to declare this public meeting closed, and we'll be dealing with this matter later on during the agenda. That takes us then to the third public meeting, and that is an application with respect to property zoning at 1931 Norris Avenue. The owners are Mr. and Mrs. Cook, the agent, Mr. White, who is here, and Mr. Vanderveen, you're going to provide us with some background?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Mayor Redekop and members of council. Oh, thanks. Okay, an application for a zoning bylaw amendment was received from Lee White, agent for David Michelle Cook. David Michelle Cook are owners of the subject property, municipally known as 1931 Norris Avenue. The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment application is to permit construction of a new dwelling on 1931 Norris Avenue. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment will change the zoning from a neighborhood development ND zone to a site-specific residential 1 R1 zone. The proposed zoning will contain site-specific zoning provisions that permit use of a private septic system in a reduced floor area for the new one-story dwelling. Notification of the May 13th, 2019 public meeting, which is currently being held, was provided in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act by placing a notice in the April 11, 2019 edition of the Fort Erie Post newspaper. In addition, property owners within 120 meters of the subject property were mailed a notice of complete application and public meeting on April 10th, 2019. This is an aerial photograph of the subject property as well as the surrounding neighborhood. The subject lands are located in the northeast corner of the Gilmore neighborhood, near the intersection of Bowen Road and Thompson Road. The subject property is located on the west side of Norris Avenue, approximately 110 meters south of Bowen Road. The following land uses are surrounding the subject property. To the north, there are single detached dwellings that front onto Norris Avenue, and further north is Bowen Road. To the south are single detached dwellings along Norris Avenue and Grape Street. To the east are single detached dwellings and several small-scale commercial or industrial uses, heading east to Thompson Road. To the west are single detached dwellings and vacant wooden residential land. This slide shows the proposed site plan for the subject property. The proposed dwelling is located on the northern portion of the site and fronts onto Norris Avenue. The proposed dwelling is 45 square meters in floor area, which is about 485 square feet. And the existing structures, decks, and Quonset hut, as shown on the site plan, will be removed. The town's official plan designates 1931 Norris Avenue as urban residential. Lands designated urban residential are intended for a variety of housing forms, such as single-detached dwellings. The proposal to amend the zoning to facilitate construction of a new single-detached dwelling is consistent with this land use designation. The area was changed to urban residential when the current official plan was developed to recognize the existing residential uses in the area and with the intent that additional residential uses would develop over the long term. This slide shows the natural heritage features in the vicinity of the subject property as identified in the official plan. There are no natural heritage features on the site itself. Woodlands over 2 hectares in size and provincially significant wetlands are located to the west and south, but these will not be impacted by this application. 1931 Norris Avenue is currently zoned neighborhood development ND zone. New development in the ND zone is not permitted and requires a zoning bylaw amendment to permit new uses. In this instance, a previous dwelling that existed on site was demolished. The proposal to construct a new dwelling requires a zoning bylaw amendment. The zoning of the property will change from the neighborhood development ND zone to a site-specific residential 1 R1 zone. This zoning bylaw amendment is also required to permit construction of a single detached dwelling on a private sewage system. 1931 Norris Avenue is within the urban boundary, but only has water service available. The site-specific zoning proposed by this application will permit use of a septic system for the dwelling until such time as full servicing is available along Norris Avenue. The town zoning bylaw normally requires construction in a residential zone to be serviced by a public water supply and sanitary sewer system. The proposed zoning will also contain a site-specific provision that permits a floor area of 45 square meters, again approximately 485 square feet, for the new one-story dwelling. Normally, the R1 zone requires a minimum floor area of 95 square meters, which is about 1,000 square feet for one-story dwellings. So this is a photograph of the subject site. These are the structures that are in place currently. They are slated to be removed. This public meeting is being held to obtain the opinion and view of area residents. A recommendation report has been placed on the agenda for later this evening. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vanderveen. Any questions by members of council? Just have a couple. So has the staff seen what is being proposed to be constructed as a dwelling on this site?
We've only seen the footprint of the dwelling on the site. We don't have any elevation drawings as of yet, but it will be a one-story dwelling.
Hence the minimum, floor area of 45 square meters.
Correct.
It seems like a large lot.
Yeah, actually, at that square footage, the dwelling will be only covering about 2% of the lot area. Although the original dwelling that was demolished was fairly similar in size.
And is that because there's a septic system that's required, private septic system?
I think that's part of it, and part of it was the applicants wanted a smaller dwelling. To explain it, the zoning permits down to 45 square meters. They can actually build a little bit bigger if they wish to.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
So then I'll call on Councilor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. I just out of curiosity, I see on our agenda the purpose of the meeting was for this property, and then it says single detached dwelling on a private septic system, right, until service is available, right? Is there any reason why we're just doing this until service is available? Are we planning on, or is it?
It's because
Just curious as to why
the
we're
services
doing
aren't
it
available.
just till the services are available.
Services aren't available, and in order to get permission to build, we have to allow a private septic system to be installed.
Yeah, just to explain it a little bit more detail, the nearest sanitary sewer is about 500 meters to the south. There's a regional pump station on the east side of Thompson, but to build on this new lot under the current zoning, well, the current zoning doesn't permit new development, but the general provisions of the town zoning bylaw normally requires water and sanitary sewer. So to build on that site under the current general provisions, sanitary sewer would have to be extended to the site. And at 500 meters, that would be, likely cost prohibitive.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vanderveen. So we'll call upon the owner or his agent, Mr. White.
Just gonna grab my pen.
Good evening, Mr. White.
Good evening. Thanks very much. Just switch this over quickly and a very brief presentation, and basically here just to answer questions as may come up. All right.
Whoops. Skip that slide.
That's fine. Okay, perfect, thank you. I'll keep it brief. Mr. Vanderveen certainly given a very good summary of what's necessary in this case. Here is an aerial from 2015 when Mr. and Mrs. Cook purchased the property. Shows the existing house and some of the accessory structures that were on the property, just to give you an idea what was there before. And this was served by a septic system and public water supply at that time. So basically just, he has characterized it as, when I bought the property, I could have pushed that house over with my bare hands, and basically just looking to put a new house on that structure. It's a matter of strictly personal preference for a smaller home, which is why they're pursuing something as in roughly 500 square feet. And that's basically the rationale behind the application. So generally going to put the new house in the same location where the other house was. Obviously would have to get a building permit and comply with Ontario Building Code and have full services necessary. The Niagara region has already reviewed the concept at pre-consultation and subsequent correspondence, and has agreed in principle to permit the holding tank on site for the duration until such time as public services may be available for sanitary, but that's likely going to be some time. And basically just answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. Any members of council have any questions of Mr. White? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor. To come to Mr. White. Mr. White, and I don't know if you can answer these questions, though. There are problems with compliance on this property with the regulations before, in regards to that they were living in a trailer, supposed to be, what, I guess, a year and a half, and they've been in there for a few years, and there's also a problem with compliance with the septic system. Help me understand that they're going to be in compliance if this goes forward with the improvement in the septic bed and the removal of the existing buildings, which they've agreed to remove.
Yeah, that is correct. Basically, they were starting on their own when they purchased the property in 2015 and did the demolition without a permit, admittedly, and, realized that they weren't allowed to do that, were informed of that, and that's sort of subsequently when we did get involved after the fact. I have seen architectural plans for a building. They've indicated to me that it is their sincere desire to build this new house. It's just a matter of, having come to the area, wanted to build their small home and get out of the GTA, and not having any other place locally to do so. So they were living in the trailer beyond the acceptable 18-month period. They basically didn't realize that they were going to be into a zoning bylaw amendment to replace a single-family dwelling.
Councillor Noyes?
Thank you for that explanation. What about the septic?
Septic was existing and was not functioning properly, so that's when they did initiate the consultation with the region and came to realize that they were going to need to replace that system. There was also the understanding that the zoning normally wouldn't allow the private septic to be constructed within the urban area. So that's part of the rationale for not having done the improvement immediately, but upon, obtaining the zoning improvement, then they definitely will do so.
Thank you.
Any other councilors? Thank you very much, Mr. White. I'm sure we'll have some questions when we get to the report.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in favor of the application for the property rezoning? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the application? If not, then I'm going to declare this public meeting closed. And we'll go to the fourth and final public meeting this evening, and that relates to a property rezoning by Ashton Homes. And I understand, Mr. Kernahan, you're back.
Thanks again, Your Worship, and members of council for hanging in there with us tonight. An application for a zoning bylaw amendment was submitted by William Highcoop, who's the agent on behalf of Ashton Homes, the owner of Block 70 in the Peace Bridge Village subdivision. Subject property is zoned site-specific open space, which permits the use of the property as an interim stormwater management pond. Property was rezoned in conjunction with the approval of the Garrison Greens, which is now the Peace Bridge Village subdivision in 2007. At that time, it was anticipated that a stormwater management facility would be constructed on the subject property on a temporary basis until such time as a permanent neighborhood stormwater management pond was constructed on the north side of Albany Street. Provisions were included in the subdivision agreement to use the subject property as 6 lots for single attached dwellings once the permanent facility was constructed and the temporary pond was no longer needed. The permanent stormwater management pond on the north side of Albany Street is currently under construction and is nearly complete. The Peace Bridge Village subdivision has been designed to convey all stormwater, including the stormwater from the proposed 6 lots that will be created on Block 70 to the permanent stormwater management facility on Albany Street. Subject property is therefore not needed for stormwater management purposes. The purpose of this application is to permit the development of 6 single detached dwellings on the subject property. The rezoning is required to change the zoning from a site-specific open space OS-375 zone to a site-specific R2 zone, which will permit 6 single detached dwellings with site-specific regulations for minimum lot area and maximum building coverage. Notification of this public meeting was provided in accordance with the Planning Act by placing an ad in the Fort Erie Post on April 18th. In addition, property owners living within 120 meters were mailed notice of the application on April 25th. This is an aerial photograph of the subject property as well as the surrounding neighborhood area. Subject lands are located in the Garrison neighborhood on the north side of Louisa Street, east of Arthur. Following summarizes the land uses surrounding the subject property. To the north are vacant residential lands within the Peace Bridge Village subdivision, currently under construction. To the south is Louisa Street and a woodlot. To the east is vacant town-owned land, zoned open space. To the west is a future road and vacant residential lands within the Peace Bridge Village subdivision. This slide shows the proposed site plan for the subject property. The plan includes 6 lots for single detached dwellings as contemplated at the time of draft plan approval. Lot frontages will exceed the zoning requirement of 15 meters, and lot sizes range from 498 square meters to 608 square meters. The lots front onto a recently constructed portion of Louisa Street within the Peace Bridge Village subdivision. The slide shows the natural heritage features on in the vicinity of the subject property. As shown, there are no natural heritage features identified on the subject property. The official plan designates the lands as urban residential. This designation permits the proposed single detached dwellings. Subject property is currently zoned site-specific OS-375, which permits it to be used as a temporary stormwater management pond only. Now that the property is no longer required as a stormwater management facility, change to the zoning to permit the development of 6 single detached dwelling lots is proposed. The proposed rezoning will change the zoning to a site-specific R2 zone with site-specific regulations for minimum lot area and maximum lot coverage. This is a picture of the subject property looking northeast from Louisa Street. And this is a picture of the property looking northwest from Louisa Street. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kernahan. And so despite the water on those photographs, I believe you've indicated that This block was never used for stormwater management.
That's correct. This block is just sort of depressed at the moment, and the water which has rained on it is sitting there. All stormwater is conveyed to the permanent facility at this time.
Which has been approved now?
It's been approved from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, and there's just a few outstanding items that the town has with it before we're willing to deem it complete, but it is close.
And once it's deemed complete, even with this zoning change, building permits wouldn't be issued until the permanent stormwater management facility is up and operating?
That's right. Once we need to accept it as complete in order to issue building permits.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone wish to address council on behalf of the applicant or the agent?
Got it.
Good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. My name is William Heikup. I'm with Upper Canada Consultants representing Ashton Homes this evening. I'll keep it brief, but basically the 2007 draft approval really set the stage for the temporary stormwater management pond. However, when my client purchased the property several years ago, we were going through the stormwater management design component of it. And while we were looking at that area, it was determined that there wasn't sufficient volume to accommodate the flow for the entire subdivision. And instead of having that flow being directed over land to the permanent facility, it was determined through consultation with town staff that the right thing to do is to build the permanent facility. As you can see, it's under construction right now. Basically, the zoning that we're applying for is really going into the rest of the subdivision. It's the same site-specific provisions. Only for this, we are looking for a reduction in lot area from 510 square meters to 498. So that's allowing us to use the land a little bit more efficiently, getting the same type of dwellings that are being constructed, same size as the rest of the subdivision. So I think Matt did a good job going through these drawings and plans, but ultimately I wanted to show you an example of what they look like. If you've driven through, you can see some of the models under construction right now, but ultimately they're compatible with the adjacent housing, permits good dwelling sizes up to 2,200 square feet, and we have an existing urban cross-section with sidewalks, and we're going to be providing those vehicle and pedestrian connections. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer any of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heikup. Do any members of council have any questions? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in support of the application? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the application? Being now, I'm going to declare this public meeting closed, and usually there's no consent agenda, so I'm going to hand the Planning and Development Services chair over to Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Planning and Development Services is now open. There are no presentations or delegations, so we're going to move right forward to reports, starting with PDS-26-2019. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Zanko. That report is now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Your Worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to support this application because I think in general terms it's a prudent and well put together submission. I have concerns. I expressed the concerns at the last meeting when we had the public meeting with respect to traffic. The report and the traffic study seem to minimize those. I spent some time looking at the traffic study. I think it didn't take into account too much of what's happening other than a projected 2% increase per year in traffic, which doesn't really, in my opinion, take into account what's going on in Crystal Beach. The reality is this is the only it's the major north-south route in and out of Crystal Beach. And it's true that that road can handle a lot of traffic. In the old days, when people were coming in and out of Crystal Beach, when the amusement park was available, there was a lot of traffic on it, but it created nightmare scenes every weekend, and I'm not really anxious to be getting us into that. I don't think this one development's going to do that. I don't think necessarily the development across the street is going to do that. But what I found quite interesting was the level of service numbers that the report talks about. And I may not fully understand the report, but it looks to me like some of the delays for people to get into traffic, making left-hand turns onto Gorham Road, could be up to a half a minute. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, except when you're sitting there for half a minute, and then there's a car that pulls up behind you, maybe the two of you can get out in half a minute, except this could turn out to be rather more than half a minute. They did their studies in August, quite correct. They used morning peak hours, 9:45 to 10:45 on a Friday and Saturday. Maybe on a Saturday there'd be traffic. They used mid-afternoon on Friday and Saturday for the afternoon peak hours. Again, maybe closer on that case to a lot of traffic going in and out. But there's a lot of traffic that leaves Crystal Beach in the morning. There's a lot that comes back in the afternoon, and there's a lot of traffic on, particularly if the plaza is constructed at the end of Dominion Road. So I think it's imperative. I know this report, at least I maybe was overly sensitive to the comments in the report about the traffic study that I've brought a notice of motion on that I think we should proceed with, because we have to get a handle on this. I don't think there's any likelihood that this road isn't going to have to be improved at some point in the not too distant future. And I think in order for us to make sound decisions on future developments, we're going to need to have that study. So I'm going to support this, but it's really premised on my hope that council will see the wisdom in supporting a Gorham Road traffic study as we go forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Noyce?
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I'm also concerned the same issues that the mayor brought up in regards to the traffic. I do think it's going to be problematic in the future. I don't know if it was in the traffic report. I didn't see the traffic report itself specifically, but I even looked up the weather, and the weather was good. So it wasn't even a bad day. It was 77 and sunny, 77 to 85 on those 2 days. So with sunshine. So I have to trust that the traffic study captured what it was, that it should have, and there was no reason that we shouldn't rely on the traffic study. I'm a bit concerned, though, that I think this area is going to change quite quickly in the next 2 years, and we may find, exactly like Mayor Redekup said, is that there's going to have to be some improvements at this area.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I have some questions, actually, and some comments that I'd like to ask the Planning Department, Mr. Brady in particular. So I'm just wondering, on page 7 of the report, the largest traffic impact will be on vehicles turning left out of the site onto Gorham Road on each side. So with neighbors being in that corridor, is there anything that we can do to help them, perhaps with 262 Gorham Road, the entrance and exit being on Gorham Road as opposed to on the side street? That would be the Lucky Gas location.
To you, the site plan will consider both the Garrison Gorham Road and the side street. I think it's important that the access be onto the main street for this kind of use, given that it's for a gas station, and that we wouldn't want to have the traffic doing multiple turns when one turn is all that's necessary to get into or out of the site. But we will take that into consideration when we look at the site plan.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if this question should be directed to you, Mr. Brady, or to Mr. Kelly, but is there an opportunity to have a delayed signal light, further to the mayor's comments, at both Dominion and at Far to slow the traffic down a bit, and also to have an advanced turning signal, because some of the obstacles that were, I guess, that occurred by residents was that in the summertime, it was very difficult to make left turns at those lights because by the time they had an opportunity, the lights had already changed.
Mr. Walsh will also answer the question. I'll start. I think that all of those things can be looked at when the traffic study is done on the street. I also think that they're going to have to be looked at when the traffic study is done for that plaza, which is coming in on Gorham. That will probably have even larger impact, and they may well be responsible for putting in some of those figures.
Mr. Brady said it exactly. He makes himself a good engineer here. The traffic study should bear out any conclusions.
And then finally, on page 9 of the report, Infrastructure Services is looking at type B as the pedestrian crossover with the upgrades, but I'm thinking that type C would probably be best. On page 153, if you were to turn to that, it would show you, 153. It shows you that there's an overhang onto the street of the lights, which I think motorists would be more apt to see as opposed to the side. Is there consideration to type C as opposed to B?
All of those will be considered as we do the overall traffic study on the road, and it will be looked at in context.
So by approving this report tonight, we're not saying, yes, we're going to agree with type B?
That's my understanding.
That's great. And finally, there is Appendix 4, which is the page after is the roundabout. We're not going to be considering anything like that in that area, correct?
As a part of this development, no. As a part of an overall development, perhaps. In fact, I think a roundabout in that area may well work quite well.
Okay, I disagree with that, but that's a discussion for a later date. Okay then, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of this report? That motion is carried. That report carries. That brings us to report number PDS-30-2019, Proposed Zoning Bylaw Amendment 63 Belfast Road South, Integra Inc., Mike Stepien.
Moved.
Thank you, Your Worship, for moving that report. That report is now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. The next report is PDS 31-2019, Proposed Zoning Bylaw Amendment, 1931 Norris Avenue, Lee White, Quartet Group, Inc. David Michelle Cook is the owner. Thank you, Councillor McDermott. Councillor McDermott.
Cool, Councillor, what's his name?
I was distracted, I'm sorry. That report is now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I'm just going to ask a few more questions in regards to the question I was asked earlier in regards to the lack of compliance for a number of issues, everything from the demolition to the septic to the living in the trailer far beyond the year and a half that they were allowed. I'm wondering if there's anything we can put in place to make sure that they actually follow through with the specifications that they have to, particularly the septic system, because I know the septic system, if it has to be upgraded or replaced, can be quite pricey. And right now it's not functioning correctly, and it puts the public at risk in that particular area, particularly if there's seepage to the surface and stuff. I don't know how bad the septic service is, but I guess it was already in need of repair. Is there anything that we can do, like get them to put some money in abeyance or something so that they don't do A, B, and C and they don't follow the rules and regulations, that then the town can step in and make sure that everything gets done as it should?
If
Mr.
I might,
Brady?
dealing with bylaws and making sure that people follow the rules is always difficult in the town, as we're well aware. And in fact, it's becoming increasingly difficult as we have more and more complaints being filed. In this particular case, it took quite a long time to force the individual into compliance because of the systems that we have in place today are inadequate. However, having said that, what we're going to do with this particular one is there will be no building permit issued on this site until such time as the region is signed off on the septic system. That is our norm, but in this case, we'll be very sure of that. And my bylaw enforcement officers will be walking by the site or driving by the site to ensure that there's no building on this site until the building permit has been followed.
I'm glad to hear that, but my only other concern, my understanding is that the region is going to provide a permit, a septic permit. It doesn't ensure that the septic is actually going to be put in, because I can't imagine they're going to put the septic in before they put the building in, because they can destroy the septic bed. Am I incorrect on that?
I wouldn't say that you're incorrect, Councillor, but the region, once they provide a permit for a septic system, they also provide follow-up inspection to ensure that the system is put in correctly and that it's functioning properly.
And if I can continue, and I would imagine then that the region has some teeth if it's not. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that we could have done too in regards to the demolition permit, in regards to not letting them live in the trailer, and that never came to fruition. It's still occurring. So again, I'm concerned about the septic system specifically in regards to the public safety. Thank you.
That's fine. We've, as I've said before, we've done as best as we can with the tools that we have. In fact, tonight, you have on your agenda the opportunity to let us move forward with having some better tools so that we can address this better in the future.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions, Your Worship?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on that. My understanding is they can't get an occupancy permit unless they've got a functioning septic system if they were to get a building permit and put up a building. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We check to ensure that the region has provided for the permit for the septic system in advance of issuing the building permit, and then we use the occupancy permit at the end to ensure that it's functioning properly.
Chair, the report makes reference on page 7 to something that we could do, which is direct staff to hold the implementing of the bylaw for the rezoning, until the applicants obtain all necessary permits. So how actually would that work? Can you get a building permit on a parcel of land that hasn't been yet properly zoned?
The simple answer to that question is no. Can we process a building permit? Yes. And so we can have the building permit processed right up to the moment that Keegan would sign it.
And then approve it once the zoning has been completed?
Correct.
And what about, if I might, Madam Chair, what about the region and its septic permit? Will they process it with assurances that they'll grant it if the property hasn't been properly zoned?
In this particular instance, I'm quite sure that the region will work with us on this matter, and if the council chooses to use the option and the alternative that's in front of them, we'll work with the region to make it work.
If I might, Madam Chair, so we wouldn't be even processing a building permit, nor would the region process a septic permit without a fee having been paid?
Absolutely.
And in this, so there's a guarantee that money will be paid. In this particular situation, before we would process a building application permit, would we insist upon an application for a demolition permit for the building that was previously demolished without a permit?
I don't believe so, but if council, I don't believe that there's a need for that demolition permit at this point, but
Okay, so what I've heard and what I've read is that somebody came in, bought a piece of property with a house on it, tore it down, and didn't get a permit. And they're supposed to get a permit, are they not, Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Brady.
yes, they are.
All right, so I didn't hear that we're going to waive that, did I? Or
No,
did
we're
I?
not going to waive it. What I'm suggesting to you is that once the the building permit is brought in, we'll address all issues at the same time.
All right, so that will include a permit for the demolition of the building previously demolished, Madam Chair?
If a permit is required, it'll be issued. If simply the taking of the fee is sufficient, we'll assess the property at that time.
I see, so there could be a fee paid without the necessity of an application for an actual demolition permit.
There could be.
What about the structures that have been constructed since the demolition of the first building, the pods? Are they going to need to be demolished? And if so, is it necessary to get a demolition permit for that construction?
Mr. Brady?
It's an interesting question. The pods, if you will, that were constructed in a fashion to try to avoid the building permit process by building within a footprint which is smaller than what we would require a building permit for. I can assure you that all of the material on the site will be demolished prior to a building permit being issued.
Okay, so yeah, my understanding was as long as it's not larger than 10 by 10, there's no need for a building permit, except doesn't that usually apply to things like sheds and outbuildings as opposed to residences?
Sometimes people can be very creative.
Yeah, look, I've got sympathy for the notion that somebody wants to own a piece of property and build a small house on that piece of property. But it seems to me that if we don't ensure that the process is followed, we're going to have little buildings going up all over the place, buildings being torn down all over the place. And my understanding, Madam Chair, and Mr. Brady can correct this, is that if you do something without a permit, you generally have to pay some additional charge. Would any of that apply in this particular case?
You pay double.
Would that apply in this particular case?
Any permit that's required moving forward that should have occurred prior to this point will be double. Any permit that's required moving forward, i.e. the new building permit for the home, that won't be at double because that would be a new building.
Okay, so I wonder if, Madam Chair, I can just run this by Mr. Brady and find out whether this would be adequate amendment to the second paragraph, which calls for the bylaw to be prepared, adding to the end of it, and presented to council upon all necessary permits for construction having been obtained from the town of Fort Erie and the regional municipality of Niagara, including any fees payable for a demolition permit for the original existing building.
Mr. Brady?
The difficulty I have with that is that they having been attained. I think you may wish to have it that all permits that are required have been applied for. and the appropriate fees paid.
Yeah, okay, so that would be it. So the wording would be, for the second paragraph, the council authorizes staff to prepare the necessary bylaw and present it to council on all necessary permits having been applied for and fees paid with respect to construction and demolition. That would be my amendment, if that's adequate.
That, as long as you're referring to both the building permit and to the septic permit.
Yes, we can specify that. All permits, building, demolition, and septic having been applied for and fees paid.
That's very clear.
So that amendment now is on the floor. Does anybody have any questions or comments with respect to the amendment? Councillor Dubineau and then Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I understand where the mayor is going with this, and I agree with him in principle. I'm just concerned with some of the challenges that we've had with this piece of property going forward and the need to essentially bring it into compliance, upgrade the septic system to ensure that that the public is well served by it. I'm just wondering if through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Brady, if if we start back charging fees, and I understand the need for deterrence, don't get me wrong, would this potentially impact the ability for the applicants to develop this property and leave us in essentially the same situation we are right now? I'm just wondering if we could get some clarification on that in your opinion.
Mr. Brady?
Through you to Councillor. I don't think so. If something doesn't occur on this property soon, we'll be issuing demolition permits and demolishing it ourselves. The intent here is to bring it into compliance. That's why the zoning is in front of us. That's why we insisted on the zoning. It's here. The suggested changes that the mayor has brought forward gives us a little stronger teeth in terms of dealing with it, and that makes it easier for us to do our job.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Noyes?
Councillor Fiddler, I don't have a question in regards to the amendment, but I have a question on the whole report, so I think we have to do the amendment, the report comes back to me.
Great. Any other comments or questions on the amendment? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? That motion carries. That report is still on the floor as amended. Any comments or questions? Councillor Noyes?
I'm going back to the public safety and the septic system. Now, I know that that's not under the town mandate anymore. That's regional, but I'm just wondering if we can get a report from the region to see if there is any risk to public safety at this time, because if history repeats itself and this thing goes as slow as the last 4 years have gone, we may be putting some public at risk. So I'm wondering if the region can give us some updates in regards to the inspection, in regards to, understand that it's not working. So, I'm sorry?
No one on.
There's no one on the property? Okay, that's fine then.
They leave?
The report indicates that we're.
It's my understanding they've left the property, and we'll be monitoring that.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That report is carried. That brings us to PDS-32-2019, Proposed Zoning Bylaw Amendment, Block 70, Peace Bridge Village, north side of Louisa Street for Ashton Homes Western Limited. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Zanko, thank you. That report is on the floor. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That carries. That brings us to report number PDS-33-2019, Peace Bridge Village Phase 1, amending subdivision agreement south of Regional Road 3, east of Arthur Street, Ashton Homes.
So moved.
Thank you, Your Worship. That report is now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That carries. That then brings us to report PDS-34-2019, proposed bylaw to provide for the maintenance of property and land, lot maintenance bylaw, and repeal bylaw number 16508. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Dubenow, thank you. That report is moved by Councillor Dubenow. Any comments or questions? Councillor Dubenow?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I do know, first off, I want to preface this by thanking Mr. Stevenson as well as Mr. Brady. I've talked with them quite a bit about the proposed changes and how they impact various things. I'm wondering, because there are some question with regard to the implementation and how these affect different things, if we could move that this be postponed to a later date to get more clarification and perhaps work on some of the wording of the proposed bylaw.
So you're asking to defer this?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. To when, yes? To the next meeting in June? And
Yeah, I'm good with that,
Madam
June.
Clerk, would you happen to have the correct date for that?
Yes, that would be June 10th.
Thank you. So this report is now deferred to June 10th 2019. Does anybody have any comments or questions to the timing of this report? Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Not so much on the timing, excuse me, but I wanted to make some comments myself on a deferral.
Okay, we can't.
So I'm wondering if,
This is on the floor right now for the timing, and it's been being deferred to June 10th, so we can't have you talk to it, unfortunately. So if you have any comments or questions with respect to the timing of the report being deferred, then we can take those.
it makes it very difficult because it was just a question that I had to add to the deferral. Right, because
Madam Clerk?
So it's an issue that you want also
included.
So I think the purpose of, as I understand it, the purpose of the deferral is for there to be further dialogue between counselors and staff.
Yeah.
And so that means that you can speak to the author of the report with respect to any aspect that may have a concern about.
Without, all right, that's fine with me.
And then when it
I
comes,
just want to make sure that I can
that's right.
bring it up
You
with
may
them.
do that. That's the purpose of the deferral. And then when it's back on June the 10th, there'll be an opportunity for full debate and discussion.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Your Worship. So the report for deferral to June 10th, 2019 is on the floor. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? That carries. That moves us to report number PDS-35-2019, Animal Control Services Contract. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Luberts. That report is on the floor. Any comments or questions? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I'm very much in support of this. I think we have been very fortunate here in Fort Erie to have our SPCA working as well as it does. I've heard very, very few complaints since I've been on council this time and when I was on council before. So kudos to the SPCA, and I think their increase of 1.5% per year is very reasonable. So I'm very much in support and think that they do a great job.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That carries. That brings us to new business and inquiries. No questions. Brings us to 7.4, business status report. Any comments or questions with respect to the report? Seeing none, I will officially close Planning and Development Services and return the chair to you.
Well done, Councillor Butler, and you've helped clear out most of the audience. That'll take us to Infrastructure Services and Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. Infrastructure Services is now in session. We do not have any presentations or delegations this evening, so that will bring us to report IS 16-2019, award of tender for the purchase of a 2020 tandem axle cab and chassis with heated dump box installed. Can I get a mover? Councillor McDermott. That report's on the floor. Is there any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That report passes. That now brings us to IS 17-2019, Glenny Municipal Drain, filing of the engineer's report as per Section 78 of the Ontario Drainage Act.
So moved.
Mayor Redekop, any questions or comments with regard to this report? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. I guess my question is in regards to the maintenance of the drain as we're moving forward. And I'm wondering if Mr. Walsh can fill us in on what the plan of action is, because that's one of the concerns I heard for a number of the people who are being affected by this drainage work, that is the town going to maintain it? Do we have a plan in place to do it, or are we going to be in the same place in the next 20 years again?
Mr. Walsh, can you comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Councillor Noyes. Over the last long time, the municipal drains and roadside ditches in our rural areas have been somewhat neglected. Both Mr. Maiden, our drainage superintendent, and George Stojanovic, our manager of roads and fleet, are implementing and executing maintenance plans for both our drains and our ditches. And I would suspect over the next coming years, you'll see market improvements to our drainage, specifically to our municipal drains. Yes, Mr. Maiden has a program in place for inspection on works that have been done recently, and to implement any required maintenance.
Councillor Noyce?
I'm glad to hear that, and Mr. Walsh and I did have a conversation regarding that earlier today. And specifically, since we're doing the Glenny Drain and Town Line Road, my understanding, and one of the people that were delegates, well, not delegate, but stepped forward today was saying is that she's lived there for 30-something years and the ditch has never been cleaned. And I'm hoping that we can look at Town Line Road in the whole scheme of things, but perhaps give it a priority since we're doing the drain. Right now, doing the ditches would probably, again, give the residents who are then paying up to, I think one's paying almost $20-something thousand for their portion of it, that they can see that the town is also, serious about maintaining it. I know the ditch isn't part of the drain, but I think it'll go a far way in helping them understand that, we are helping them, we are behind them. We do understand the problem with water.
Mr. Walsh, did you want to just take note for consideration, or did you want to comment on that as well?
If I may, Madam Chair, Council in the last budget approved a special supplementary item for the production of a rural drainage master plan, looking at all our ditches, determining priorities. I would suggest that our priorities are areas that are suffering significant drainage issues right now, notwithstanding the Glenny drain. I don't know quite where it falls in that priority. That would be my comment on that, but I do understand your concern.
Councillor Noyes, anything further?
No, that's totally understandable.
Councillor Luberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on Councillor Noyes' concern about maintenance, I understand that, going with staff and having staff work out a plan for, future maintenance and whatever. But as you heard Mr. Maiden earlier, when the mayor asked him a question, he said that you might want to refer that to our predecessors, his predecessor, and the gentleman from K-Smart. And that's the problem that we ran into. The mayor commented that his report was here back in 2005. And because it was relied on that we would just work with it and go forward with it, it never got done. The reason it didn't get done is because we don't have a policy in place to make sure that these things are done. So I think that I would ask Mr. Kelly, or Mr. Walsh rather, right, that we include the not just a maintenance plan, but a maintenance policy that would be followed by future councils and future drainage superintendents. So if Mr. Walsh would like to comment on that, but I would like to see not just a plan, but a policy.
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What Councillor Luberts is speaking about is an asset management plan for our rural drains. As Council knows, we're undertaking an asset management plan, study right now. It'll be presented to Council in early July. One of our takeaways out of that plan for staff is to develop policies and procedures that allow us a formalized process and put it in writing as to what we're going to do. So I think it speaks and aligns exactly with Councillor Lubert's wishes.
Councillor Luberts, anything further? Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? That report carries. Are there any items of new business or inquiries by council members? Councillor Noyce?
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. I have asked Mr. Walsh this earlier about the stop sign at the corner of Point Avenue and Bowen Road, and the need for more police enforcement, and I'm just wanted to ask it again.
Mr. Walsh, did you get that?
Yes, I did. You know I did. The stop sign was approved late last fall. It will be installed shortly. I believe the bylaw has passed. And in addition, we will pass on councillors' concerns to the police for enforcement of speed in the area.
Any other inquiries? Seeing none, does any member of council have any questions regarding the business status report? Established a date of order revision? Okay. Madam Clerk, can we just go back to report IS 17-2019? I'm hearing that we missed establishing a date for the Court of Revision.
I would state that it would be prudent that you do that.
Okay.
What you would be doing is amending the second recommendation and actually inserting a date.
Okay.
I believe that was 30 days, within 30 days, Mr. Walsh, is that correct?
Yes.
So can I get a member of council to make that amendment to include the date of 30 days? Councillor Butler. That amendment is on the floor. Is there any questions or comments?
Do we have a date, or is it just within
30
30
days.
days?
Should be establishing a date.
An actual date. So
I wonder if the clerk can give us a suggested date.
I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, did you say the 10th of June?
Week of the 10th of June.
On June 11th, Tuesday night.
Okay, so the amendment to the report is to have the Court of Revisions date on Tuesday, June the 11th at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. That amendment is on the floor. Is there any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries. Madam Clerk, do we have to, okay, we'll go back to the original report. All in favor? That carries. That now brings us to the business status report. Does any members have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I will happily hand the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zanko. Just handled that very well. That takes us to Corporate and Community Services, Councillor McDermott.
Thank you, Worship. There are no presentations and delegations tonight. We'll go right to reports. Did I get a mover for CAO 09-2019? Thank you. Councillor Zanko? Are there any comments or questions? Okay, Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My constituents would like to know if it's standard practice to provide funding for renovations to offices. Does that fall under our purview?
Joanne?
Worship to Councillor Butler. We currently don't have a physician recruitment policy in place. We are working towards that this summer. We have been working towards what we currently provide funding for and what's been provided on a historical basis. I have just recently completed an overview historical funding that goes back about 15 years and what we provided in the past. And we have, in fact, in the past provided funding for renovations to office space to that particular practice that the report refers to.
I'm sorry, did I hear you correctly that we have in the past to that particular group that's requesting it now? So my question to that then would be, why would we offer them more money to further expand? Because I'm just wondering if maybe you can give me some particulars.
Sure. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Butler.
Well, just want to just clarify, and I just want to preface that I know that doctors are very important to the town of Fort Erie, and to attract them here is very difficult. So when we get them, we want to keep them. So just want to preface that. But it is also a business, is it not? And so with that in mind, and they've already received a grant previous to this to renovate, why would we then make an exception to offer them more grant money to renovate a second time? Because I would think that I, as a business owner, that would fall under my responsibility. Or if the landlord is inclined to keep a tenant, it would fall under his purview. Just hoping that you can give me some clarification. Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Butler. Yes, in 2007, the family group practice received $60,000 for additional fully equipped medical office space, which did not include the incentives that the physicians that moved in there did. Since then, Dr. Leung has retired, and that office space does not communicate directly with that family health organization. It's off to the does not have direct communication with that area. So I do believe that the intent is to make it a more open area so that an incoming physician feels well supported. I should probably give also a little background just to give you a little bit of information. Right now, Niagara has 250 family physicians, and we should have 313. So we're short 65. That's assuming that practice size is on average 1,380. We know that the physicians that are going to have impending retirements have much larger practices than that. So that puts us short more than, we would probably have to bring in 2 for every 1 practice for that. Right now, our residency program, we have 9 in PGY2, so they're going to graduate, and then we have 7, and this is in all of Niagara, PGY1s, that's a total of 16. So that means we're only graduating 16 every 2 years. And we're short 65. So the competition is great. On the Health Force Ontario website right now, there's 1,200 posted positions for 400 spots. So it is very competitive, and most of those postings on Health Force Ontario say turnkey office space. So I think that's up to council to decide what makes something turnkey and what doesn't, and who pays for that.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just a follow-up question. So thank you for clarifying that, and that just kind of gives us the information that we need. So the renovations really is to attract another doctor to our area so that we can supplement what is there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I have some of the same concerns that Councillor Butler expressed, but I also wonder, what is the responsibility of the owner of this building? I have no problem with the doctors. I think they provide a great service, and this is going to help attract one. Okay, but for leasehold improvements and things like that to the building, I don't see that the owner is stepping up to the plate. And particularly from the accessibility committee, the bathroom there is not accessible to anyone with a walker or a wheelchair. I know that in the earlier report we have that the $50,000 should be tied to improving the accessibility in the bathroom. I don't see anything in the recommendation that refers in the body of the report. It's there, but there's nothing in the actual recommendation that we're passing, if we pass it. So I'm not going to support that, because I think sometimes you have to hold the owner responsible, put his feet to the fire, and I think we have very little say because we're not paying the rent, but the doctors are paying the rent. And I think if the doctors put some pressure on their owner, perhaps we will see some improvements in regards to the accessibility of the building, not particularly this particular office itself, but it's part of all the offices within there. And I think the owner needs to step up to the plate, and the doctors can put some pressure on them.
Did you want to speak to that?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Noyes, the second letter that came from Dr. Giannotti did not address the accessibility issues.
Mr. Councilor, that's my point. I don't know if the doctors are even trying to bring our concerns forward to the owner of the building. There was no reference to the need for some renovations to the accessible bathroom at all. It was just kind of like mute. And so I'm not going to support this. because I think the owner should step up to the plate, and I think the doctors, for their own clients, should be pushing this issue, and I don't see that they are.
Councillor Zanko?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joanne, with regard to your memo, I'm reading, if the request is approved by council, an agreement will be prepared that outlines reimbursement following final construction costs and confirmation of a recruited physician. Could you just explain that for me a little bit? I'm understanding that these costs will be paid back to us then.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Zanko. I think the intent of that line was that Dr. Gennady had stated in his letter that the request represented 80% of the total cost of upgrade, so that we would stick to that 80% to ensure that we only paid 80% out, and that we would have confirmation of a recruited physician, as stated in his letter, upon reimbursement. So it would be basically as part of an incentive package. So cost to upgrade the space for a recruited physician would go against what an overall incentive would be.
And just a further question, what would normally that cost be to recruit the physician?
On average in Niagara, it's $100,000 now.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, I had a lot of questions about this, and I've had a lot of dialogue with both the CAO and Ms. Ferraccioli with respect to this. And I appreciate the questions and the comments that have been made this evening. This group practice was created with funding from the municipality. We entered into an agreement with Dr. Gennady and Dr. Ludeman at that time, and paid, I believe, half the costs of creating the space in the building that they're in order to allow them to set up a group practice. That was the direction that medical practice was going 15, 16, 17 years ago. That's even more so now. So it's very important for groups to be able to continue to replace doctors as they retire, and make sure that they've got the equipment and the space available. The original letter that came in on this, I must say, was lacking in particulars, and I had discussed with both the CAO and Ms. Ferraccioli the need for us to have a policy. There seemed to be a policy a while ago that really spoke to money that came from community health and wellness was going to the actual recruitment of a physician. And whether it was paying money directly to a doctor to help offset some of their costs of education or moving, or just a bonus to get them to come to this town, or whether it was putting money into a clinic, either this group clinic or another group clinic that we had funded in 2004, there was a rationale for why we would put the money out, all with a view to making sure that the residents have the access to primary health care that they need. I think the threshold at the time was around 50%. Seems to me that's what we were putting out. So I've asked that we have a policy created that will at least give us some guidance and comfort as we receive these applications that go forward. I did also suggest that I thought that this should be tied to the recruitment of a physician, and Councillor Zanko has pointed out the memo that we received on April the 30th. But I think that needs to be in the recommendations. I think that this report needs to be amended to include that. And to address Councillor Noyes' concern, it's also a point that was raised by Ms. Ferraccioli about the accessibility. I think we should make that a condition of the funding. We're going to give them $50,000 on a $62,500 project. Let's give them $50,000 on a $70,000 project. And then at least we've got the accessibility. So I'd like to make two amendments if I could, Mr. Chair. The first is with respect to the first paragraph, first recommendation, and when it gets to the last line where it makes reference to physician recruitment, I think we should add in the words, including an accessible washroom. So that's my amendment to that paragraph.
Anybody want to speak to that? All in favor? Okay.
And the second amendment, Mr. Chair, is to add the paragraph immediately after that to state that an agreement will be prepared that authorizes reimbursement to the Fort Erie Group Family Practice following final construction costs and confirmation that a recruited physician has joined the group.
Comments or questions? All in favor? We'll move on to the motion as amended. All in favor? I'm sorry, question, Councilor Lewis?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up with what the mayor was saying. He mentioned that he wanted some kind of a policy. And I think that, making an amendment is fine. We have a report that was amended. We're going to pass a report. But what's the policy that we're going to start following from this point forward with, clinics? Are we going to support them under certain conditions, whatever it is? But the policy needs to be written up, right? So I think we need to add, maybe through a motion tonight, that staff prepare a policy, or I don't know how we would go about it, but maybe Mr. Cook could help us.
Mr. Cookett?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. I don't think the policy should be a part of this report. It's a separate issue. We've been working on this policy. We're aware that we need to establish one. We'll put one together with recommendations of what we should fund and should not, and that will come before council probably midsummer, and then we can make any changes at that time.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All in favor? Carried. So we'll move on to CAO 14-2019, funding request from ophthalmology. Mayor Redekop.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. In the body of the report, it talks about the equipment, the $100,000 equipment being needed, and I have no problem supporting that. But in the body of the report, it talks about that the equipment is going to stay in Fort Erie. So in other words, we don't buy it. The doctor comes. He says, "Oh well, I won $1 million. I'm going to move to Hawaii and take this with me." It's in the body of the report that he can't do that, but I don't see that in the actual recommendation. And I'm wondering whether we should be nailing that down, that the equipment has to stay in Fort Erie.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Noyes. I have prepared a draft agreement, and it does outline, it would be in the bylaw and the draft agreement that equipment would stay, because Dr. Sopasan has agreed to start immediately upon the purchase of the new equipment, but there's also another ophthalmologist that was recently recruited by Niagara Health, and he's a surgical ophthalmologist, and he is also interested in providing some community services. So that equipment will be well used. So yes, it should stay. Shouldn't belong to the.
So hearing that, even though I don't see it in the recommendation, it's going to be in the actual bylaw that's coming forth. It'll be specified. Okay, that's fine with me. Thank you.
Councilor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Joanne, I just have a couple of questions with respect to the equipment. Is it common practice for municipalities to purchase equipment for physicians of that nature?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Butler. In this situation, community ophthalmology is actually quite unique to have ophthalmology services within a town of this size. We've been fortunate to have this service for 45 years. So it is a very valuable service because it offers ophthalmology for services like glaucoma, macular degeneration, non-surgical things that are best treated at the community level. And yes, there are municipalities that do provide specialist equipment that stays for community use. For instance, there are municipalities that purchase spirometry equipment to perform respiratory therapy type testing, and they do that in order to keep those services at the community level.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, just one more question. with respect to the surgeon, will he be coming down to Fort Erie then as a direct result to utilize that equipment so that it would expand the services for our constituents?
Through your worship to Councillor Butler. So this particular, we toured two new Niagara Health recruits for ophthalmology, which is again a real win for Niagara. Both of them want a lot of surgical time. So they want their surgery is going to be consolidated, as we all know. So they want to be where the other surgeons are. But what happens in follow-up, and in not just follow-up, but in consultation, it's best to see the client in their own community, especially most of them are elderly. So they can see the client, then refer them to their surgical time. These surgeons like to be busy. So it does. It increases the capacity of the surgical program.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Noyes?
Just one further question. In regards to this particular machine itself for testing for peripheral vision, for glaucoma, my understanding is that the government actually pays for the test. It's not like we're giving like the doctor an expensive machine that he's then going to make additional profit of, because the individual, like, I'm not going to have to pay for it if I have glaucoma. It will be covered under my health insurance.
Through you, your worship to Councillor Noyes, the test itself might be, but they need the visual fields test is covered by OHIP, but they need that piece of equipment enabled in order to perform that visual test.
Further questions? Favor? Any? Carried. Are there any new business inquiries? Seeing none, we'll move to the business status report. Are there any questions of that? Back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor McDermott. That takes us to scheduling of meetings. Councillor Dubineau.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Tomorrow morning at Regional Headquarters at 9:30 a.m., we have a Transportation Steering Committee meeting, and that is in the Regional Council chambers. Next week as well, on June 21st, there is a Fort Erie Public Library Board meeting at 5:30 in the Centennial Library Boardroom. I won't be able to be there because we have a council meeting at the same time, but that meeting is on, and that's all I have.
Councillor Noyes.
Thank you. On May 23rd, there is going to be our second Black Creek Development Community Update meeting at the Black Creek Community Center at 6:30.
Councillor Zanko and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tomorrow, May the 14th, there is a Fort Erie Active Transportation Committee meeting being held here at Town Hall at 5:30 p.m., I believe in conference room 1 or 2. That I'm not too sure of,
And
but it's here.
Okay. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. On Wednesday, May 15th at 9:30 a.m., there is an Affordable Housing Committee meeting in conference room number 3 here at the Town Hall. And tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. in conference room 1, I believe, there is a meeting for the museum board here at the Town Hall.
Any others? Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. This Wednesday, May 15th, we have a Environmental Advisory Committee meeting at the Town Hall here in conference room 3, I believe,
And the time?
5 o'clock.
Okay. Any others? Councillor Noyes.
Yes, I forgot to mention that there's on May 15th, again, Wednesday, we have a Fort Erie not-for-profit meeting at 9 a.m. and we have the meeting at May's Restaurant in Stevensville.
What's the time of that? In case I get hungry. Did you say the time? 9 a.m.? So it's a breakfast meeting. Okay, anything else? If not, can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Zanko, you look very anxious to do that. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Thank you. Take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back for the council meeting. Okay, I'm going to call this special council meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, Your Worship.
Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? If there are none, then Councillor Dumanow, you have a motion for us to go into a closed session.
Yes, I do, Your Worship. Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Noyes, that council does now go into closed session at 8:26 p.m. to discuss the following. Pursuant to Section 239(2)J of the Municipal Act 2001, a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, or financial information that belongs to the municipality or local board and has monetary value or potential monetary value re cell towers. And pursuant to Section 239(2)C of the Municipal Act 2001, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board re amalgamation of fire stations 4 and 6.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Okay, we're back in session, and Councillor Zanko, you have the resolution. to
Yes, I
take
do,
us
Your
out of
Worship.
closed session.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Butler, that council does now rise and reconvene from closed session at 9:25 p.m. with respect to the following items. Cell towers, staff rise with report and proceed as directed. B, amalgamation of the fire stations 4 and 6, that we rise with report, that staff proceed as directed.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That takes us then to are there any notices of motion this evening? Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to bring notice of motion that Town Council requests that the federal government provide information on all cannabis licenses, including personal medical licenses, to the town of Fort Erie when licenses are issued, and further that a public process takes place in connection with granting cannabis licenses and their location. And I'm hopeful that this will be circulated to other municipalities that I'm sure is probably facing with the same issues as we are.
So that will be coming Tuesday, May the 21st. Any other notices of motion? Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. I don't have the motion with drawn up yet, but I will be bringing forward a notice in motion regarding the ash tree situation in the town of Fort Erie and the region for that matter. And so I've spoken with the NPCA on this issue, and I've looked over our tree bylaws, and I think that we need to take a second look at how we're dealing with it. So I'll be bringing a form notice of motion forward in regards to that.
And when will that be?
I want to talk with Environmental Advisory Committee on Wednesday night, and I think I could bring it forward on Monday.
Okay, so that would be
next week.
Tuesday, May the
Tuesday,
21st. Okay. Councillor Dumanow.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be giving notice of motion regarding review of the environmental conservation overlay on properties in Garrison, the developed properties in Garrison Village. And that's returnable on Monday as well. Tuesday, thank you.
Any others? Okay, so we'll have at least some business to do on Tuesday. That takes us then to the consideration of bylaws, and Councillor Noyes, you have the resolution for first and second reading. I says you do resolution number 3.
Okay. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Dumanow that bylaw package containing 68/2019 to authorize the entry into the execution of an agreement with JPAS International Incorporated for the acquisition of the former Fort Erie Public School and the former Fort Erie High School sites, and 69/2019 to authorize the entry into a grant agreement with the Ministry of Employment and Social Development under the Enabling Accessibility Fund, given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. So those bylaws are on the floor for any questions or comments. If none, Councillor Butler, third and final reading, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dubenow, that bylaws 68-2019, 69-2019 are given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and clerk under the corporate seal.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor McDermott, you have the next resolution.
Thank you, Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Luberts, that bylaw number 70-2019 to confirm the actions of council at its council and committee meeting and its special committee or special council meeting held on May 13th, 2019 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor Luberts, you have the next resolution.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor McDermott, that bylaw number 70-2019 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. And that takes us to the most exciting resolution of the
best
evening.
one.
Councillor Dubenow.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Butler, that council adjourns at 9:30 p.m. to reconvene into a regular meeting of council on May 21st, 2019.
All those in favor? Great, that's unanimous.